there, and welcome to Labour Media. Previously, I did a video on the political compass test, and it did pretty well. Since LeftValues updated itself with a bunch of new questions, political tests have been on my brain again. So I decided in the last episode of Broadcast Interruption to take some more political tests, finding some decent tests and some absolute trash that is almost, if not as bad as the Polcomp test. Today we're going to be analysing the LeftValues test, Sapply Values, and the values test, talking about their good qualities and the consistent problems that need to be ironed out in future political tests. We'll also go on to how I think they've generally impacted political discourse and political understanding. Let's get started. LeftValues recently got itself an updated set of questions, so it's a good place to start for our analysis. LeftValues is a more specific test than others. Rather than its questions trying to map you onto an ideology from across the political spectrum, it uses the 7 axes on screen now to map you onto a specifically left-wing ideology, the selection of which we'll discuss in a moment. However, it's the problem I have with some axes that lead on to a big problem with this test: vagueness. Let's take some of those environmental questions, for instance. Some small-scale destruction of nature is acceptable if it notably benefits humanity. What does this mean? To what degree is the destruction? To what degree is the benefit? Same with the question, is it acceptable for humanity to suffer to some notable extent to preserve the natural ecosystem? What does some notable extent mean? Are we sacrificing people to the eternal hunger of the woods, or are we radically altering what types of food is consumed in the first world? Don't even get me started on the question of religion should remain influential in society. What do they mean? Do they mean destroying the line between church and state, or just continuing to allow people to follow the faith as they wish? The vagueness here could provoke a variety of different movements on the metrics depending on what is put if we don't know what the question actually means. Another problem is the issue of questions that invoke two statements and ask whether you agree with both, such as the ones on screen now. What if someone wants the basis of socialist society to be unions but not worker councils, or vice versa? I might not want a significant drop in the quality of life, though. Once again, it's vague to the degree. But I definitely want a drop in production. Any good environmental policy should target the issue of overproduction, which I go more into in my video on markets, link below. These questions are asking you to agree to two premises rather than one, without the option to agree to one or the other. Furthermore, some questions are just outright stinkers, like this question, this bloody question. Human population growth must be curbed to prevent ecological disaster. Obviously, this is Malthusian bogus. Overpopulation is not the problem, overproduction is. However, we must look at it as a question, presumably an environmentalist one. Overpopulation is a myth. It's not a viable way of analysing environmental catastrophe in the slightest. It's a fascist distraction. Does agreeing here make you more of an environmentalist? Because that's daft. You're not an environmentalist if you agree, you're just a twat. This question is irrelevant at best and says something disturbing about whoever made it, or worse. But we're not done. We also have to look at the ideologies that the test maps you onto and how they're defined. Not only is social democracy on there, which I would argue is not a leftist ideology, but that's a topic for another video. But look at how it botches the definition of Marxism-Leninism. What? Was their source that this was revealed to them in a dream? Since when was Marxism-Leninism when no trees? Moreover, the blanket statement MLs are patriotic is in conflict with most MLs in the imperial core, and certainly many in the periphery outside socialist countries. MLs in the core really shouldn't be patriotic to a country that's not a dictatorship of the workers or a victim of imperialist aggression. LeftValues is a decent test that's fun to take with some unique and varied questions, but is held back by vagueness, poorly written questions, straight up bad/irrelevant questions, and a poor definition for a variety of ideologies. Kinda meh, really. Sapply Values is a test that maps you onto a political compass that envelops authoritarian libertarian on the Y and left-right economics on the X, as well as above it maps progressivism conservatism separately to the other axes. Right away, this is a fantastic change. One of my big complaints with the Polcomp test was the problematic Y-axis that fused statism with progressivism. Now in this test, you can actually get into the off zone based off the questions that regard things such as statism, security, safety versus freedom, etc., without being a bloody Tory. The fact it still uses a compass is a bit scuffed still, as I explained in my other Polcomp video, link below. The meaning of authoritarian is vague. The Marxist position, which should go in the red, is not a statist position and will evolve back into the green, and the purple section of libertarians and ANCAPs is still very much a marginal position on the global stage that itself loops back to being authoritarian. Still, if they're going to have a compass, they might as well make it not utterly ludicrous. The questions aren't that bad either. Questions like all industry should be nationalised are ones that can actually put someone on the left, as opposed to the sock-dem-friendly economics questions of the other tests, such as the Polcomp. Maybe there could be an option in this question to ask whether an economy organised on the lines of free agreement would be preferable to account for anarchists, but overall, big improvement. There's a couple stinkers like the government should be less involved in the day-to-day life of citizens, which could refer to social, statist or economic metrics and suffers the same vagueness issue, but on the whole it's pretty good. It's only 46 questions long too. It's short and sweet. Can't be surprised, but Sapply Values is pretty decent. Probably the best political test I've ever seen. With a little fine-tuning, it could be even better still. Not bad. Not bad in the slightest. LeftValues is a test that's almost iconic as the Polcomp test itself. Back in the day, it was even seen as the cool alternative to the Polcomp, with more axes and the ability to answer neutrally the question. However, these are no longer a revolutionary concept for a bloody political test, and with the benefit of hindsight, we see that this test is an absolute disaster. Something almost as bad, if not, well, as bad, as the Polcomp. So LeftValues uses 70 questions, some of which are absolute doozies, to put you onto the axes below. We'll talk about these later, but already I have some questions like, look at this. Equality versus markets. What? What kind of dichotomy is this? This isn't socialism versus capitalism, it's just the wrong way of looking at things. Big thanks for the Reddit post on screen now. We're putting down all this stuff now on the test. I'll be using it a lot later, but just look at this. With social meaning social democracy, why is capitalism on here 5 times? This isn't something you can put on a gradient like this. Say it with me now. Socialism is not when the government does stuff. But we'll get back to that in a moment, because the questions on these tests are almost thematic in how terrible they are. Like the apotheosis of all the aforementioned problems. Vagueness? Why, we have that in spades. Just look at these. What is a valid reason? What type of progress? Social, economic, or technological? What do you mean by my group? Identity, political, or comparative? What traditions? Breathing's been pretty traditional to humans, and I reckon we should keep that around. I know that's facetious, but still, some traditions are better than others. What does strength mean? Strength of character? Strength of enforcement? Chauvinism? So many questions are incredulously vague. We've also got shoving 2 statements in one question. Oh, lovely jubbly. I don't support the EU, but I would support, for instance, a Pan-Africanist union. That would be based. But do they specifically mean like the EU? A neoliberal, border fascism enjoying regional union? There's nuances to politics that are just not understood by this test. On that note, we also have plain bad questions like, what is this? There's such a liberal big gov versus small gov understanding of politics that vast majority of governments are on the same side as corporations. You can't really fight one or the other because they're in cahoots. Oppression by corporations is allowed and protected by governments, and oppression by governments is funded and commanded by corporations. This is pretty 101 stuff here. Speaking of 101 stuff, a hierarchical state is best. What? States are the vehicles with which one class oppresses another. They are, by definition, hierarchical. You can't have a horizontally organised state. What the bloody hell is this test talking about? When the questions aren't reused Polcomp questions or just run-of-the-mill, they're overly vague and demonstrate a horrendously botched understanding of politics. But give me bloody strength, we're still not done. This test had to go and use its daft metrics to map people onto an ideology. Oh, joy. Thanks to this same Reddit post, we can uncover just how deep this rabbit hole goes. I already mentioned this top bit earlier, but, why is liberal on this axis? And why is it less statist than moderate or statist? Liberalism relies on the state, and that goes just as much for classical liberalism. It may talk about rolling back the frontiers of the state, but they still require a state to enforce the regime of capitalism and to expand their markets abroad through imperialism. In those regards, it's incredibly authoritarian. But back to mapping ideologies. The test combines the results of each axis to match someone onto one of these ideologies, and just look at all the ideologies available. Where do I even start with the comical level of ideological esoterica? Totalitarian capitalism, libertarian capitalism, ultra-capitalism, look at all of these. They're jokes. A little more than jokes taken too seriously by this test, like saying revolutionary socialism is separate to Marxism or anarchism, or this bit where totalitarian nationalism, fascism, Nazism, and capitalist fascism are all somehow unique results you can land on with this test. Why is anarcho-communism and progressivism the only ones that are revolutionary on the social axis, but Marxism or revolutionary socialism are only very progressive? Who calls their political ideology reactionary? That's not an ideology, that's an epithet. Right-wing and left-wing populism are apparently unique ideologies. Anarcho-mutualism and mutualism are somehow different things. God knows what distributism is. Global totalitarianism is literal world domination and ideology on here. What? Yeah, so between insipid questions, daft metrics, and appalling methodology for mapping an already ridiculous number of ideologies to the botched results, LeftValues, I'm not a fan. In conclusion, these tests are indicative of, and indeed partially to blame for, the hegemonization of ideologies themselves. Now, what do I mean by this? We see through these tests, with vaguely worded questions combined with a complete misunderstanding of politics, an utterly liberal perspective that treats a subject as an aesthetic or a cool fandom before any sort of strongly held belief that you wish to see implemented in the world. Of course, this is going to happen with these fun, time-waster tests, which have people compare the results of each other, and some degree, you have a good time, But most of these tests encourage such a narrow, vague conception of politics to a point where the truly extant positions, the core fundamentals of left and right, are only understood in a liberal caricature that cannot perceive any greater philosophical point than, truly, socialism is when the government does stuff. I was pleasantly surprised here and there in my research, but for the most part, political tests have overly vague questions, strange metrics, and a holistically ridiculous way of mapping ideologies onto results. Thank you for watching. We got a bit heated in parts there. And my vocal cords are currently paying the price. It is like, have a look. See, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. It's quieter at this time. Fun fact. So with the transcripts in the description, along with the test used and my prior video on the political compass test, and there's a Twitter thread as well on the LeftValues test that inspired this video. I disagree with a lot of it, as I said in my previous broadcast interruption on this, but also make some good points. Anyhow, the next video is going to be a big one. I should be big. I'm not sure it's going to be the next video because it's a big video I have planned. I'll probably at least put like a broadcast interruption between it at least. I said at least twice. I don't know why I did that, but maybe another little one. I'm thinking, as I said, doing another vid on Pat Stocks because that situation has developed a bit. If you've been fortunate enough to be on Twitter, that's developed. They are having a normal one. These quote-unquote socialist patriots. Oh, that hurt. Ow. Oh, why did I make that noise? Oh dear. What was I thinking about? I lost my train of thought again. Yeah, so, also, maybe, I might be redoing my video on the labour theory of value, because, I think it's been outdated to how I, conceive the idea nowadays. So, yeah, I might make a redux version of that. I think that's all. Yeah, so the, next big video I'm working on is gonna be, a video on, the Labour Party. The British Labour Party, or no, it's going to be like a pretty big video looking at the whole history and why they have never really been a socialist party and why socialists should not support them. It's going to be called For the Few, Not the Many, People's History, the Labour Party. I think that's a pretty good title, honestly. Yeah, so this has been Labour Media, and remember, Labour conquers all.